Shut up and sit down.
Alright guys, I'm Dodge, this is Bigmeks Workshop and Paint Studio, and this is going to be a long video as we are painting the black coach. It is a really cool model, lots of features to it, but I would recommend painting this in sub-assembly, and that's what I'm showing you here. Don't glue the guy in the coffin if you want the coffin exposed. I got carried away with the build and didn't pay attention. But I'm just showing you here all the parts I'm going to paint individually. So also in this video, for a change, we are going to try and stick to one particular thing, finish painting that and then move on, so you don't, if you're wondering what colours were used in a combination to make a certain colour, you're going to have all those in one section. I'm going to try doing that from now on rather than jumping back and forth, but it does make producing the videos a lot longer, as I've got to wait for paint to dry to carry on with things, so we'll see how that goes. And as you can see, what I'm showing you here is all the sub-assembly and all the little details. And as per usual, we started with Vallejo's Black Primer because it's a good solid primer, and then we're going to use Scale 75's Black Leather. Now in hindsight, I will tell you this now as we're starting, maybe mix black leather with a bit of decay black to get a bit of a darker black on that wood effect, but I'm only using the airbrush for very limited things on this model, guys. I'm just using it to apply the base coat nice and quickly. We're also going to muck around a lot with textures here as well, so we're going to use Scale 75's Arbuckle Brown. And I'm not going to cover the whole model, I'm going to cover those raised parts because I want the wood features to look a bit weathered. So this is what I mean by we're going to be working on texture a lot. Just running along those raised areas and leaving little lines across them. They don't have to be too neat because the eye won't pick them up individually. It won't really pick everything up till later on. I also decided at this point to do Mechanica Standard Grey on the coffin as I glued it in, which was a bit of a mistake, and I didn't want to worry about hitting it with the browns later on or hitting my browns with the greys, so decided to get that in nice and quick right at the beginning. And then I spent a day being very distracted with the inside of this coffin, as it's such a cool little feature to have on the model there. And we're going to paint the rags for this corpse in Steel Legion Drab. I believe it's a corpse, but it's from an undead army. I don't know exactly what it is. If you do know what it is, let us know in the comments. Also let us know in the comments if you'd like to see more fantasy stuff, although we have just done a binge of like a month or so of fantasy stuff. Next, I'm going to thin down Talon Sand, and I'm going to use that to cover most of the model here. I'm going to leave all those dips, creases and recesses alone, and just add a very thin area of Talon Sand over the top there, and you can start to see that colour difference as it's slowly building up. Next, we're going to use Talon Sand again, but we're going to use Sandstone by Model Air and mix that in there. We're just basically using the sandstone, we're just going to lighten up that Talon Sand ever so slightly. And we're going to do the same thing again. You can see on the feet there, that's really starting to make them look more pronounced, and like the light is coming from the top. And I did like this colour scheme. The Talon Sand, instead of it being a brown, makes it look more weathered and more yellow. Next, we're going to make a Athonian Camo Shade, Agrax Earthshade Wash, and the Athonian Camo Shade is 1 part, Agrax Earthshade 3 parts, because we really don't want that green to be overpowering at all. This is also what me and Andy call the toilet water mix, but it's just in a different ratio, and I did take note this time of the ratio, because we want more of a brown, and we want those browns to sit in those recesses and really darken down the dark versions of the Talon Sand. After that, we're going to move on to doing the leather straps, and this is me again getting distracted, mucking about with texture. So we're going to use black leather by Scale 75 mixed with brown leather over a black prime. That's going to be the main base for it, and if there's any extreme recesses on these belts, you leave a little bit of that black showing through. Now what we're going to do is add Scale 75 orange leather into the mix of black leather and brown leather. Just a very small amount, just to tone it ever so slightly, and we're going to make these leather straps look weathered so it matches everything else. I really did get distracted with this piece and then realised once I put the model together with the coffin open, you really don't see it that much, but I thought it was an opportunity to show you how to add some extra details to your leather work. Next, we're going to put in orange leather on its own. This is really watered down. I'm using a wet palette for this, and you can see the effects building up there, because the leather itself does have some lines in it already that Games Workshop have sculpted in, so we're highlighting around those and around the very edges, just making it look a little bit more orange and a little bit more weathered. Next, we're going to add Scale 75's Iroko to the orange leather, just a little bit. These are actually instructions, I believe, off the Scale 75 leather and wood set, which I still haven't got 100% right, but I'm definitely getting better at working with these. And at this point you can see I've changed to a Winsor Newton Series 7 for a much finer point, as the details are quite small. Next, we're going to add Scale 75's birch to the Iroko and orange, and that looks like that will probably be the final highlight for that. And as you can see, we've weathered that up by doing little layers, showing some of the other layers coming through, but it's basically weathered them out, so it started as a nice strong leather colour, and as it gets to the edges, instead of being brighter, it just looks more and more worn, which is the effect you want to go for with that combination of paints. And just to finish it off, I'm going back to black leather with a little bit of decay black, and I'm going to paint in some very fine lines where the creases are and where there's some gaps. You can also use this to paint scratch marks into the leather. You paint a scratch mark or a tear and then go back to the birch Iroko orange mix and edge highlight that. I will try and zoom the footage in for this as well so you can get a better look. After that, we're using sandstone and talon sand again, as we did previously put a wash on this model. The reason we put the wash on it before is so the wash sits in those recesses around the straps and adds that extra depth. And we're just going back over, leaving some of the previous colours there showing through, and we're just going to highlight those top raised parts again. I do enjoy painting fabric and bumpy material with glazing. I find it really relaxing for some reason. Most people hate it. And Model Air Metallic Gunmetal is going to be used as the colours for the chain, and I'm probably going to use that for his helmet as well. We will come back to that one later on, I believe. Next, this is Agrax Earthshade on its own, watered down, and I'm just going to now place it into those dips as the sack. It looks like a burlap sack sort of thing. His bindings, mummifications, whatever, have got a lot of dips in them, so the deepest dips I'm just putting the small amount of Agrax Earthshade and letting it sit in there just to really darken down those areas and give a much better contrast with the highlights that I've done. Now, Model Air Sandstone on its own is going to be used, and I think that's probably the final highlight for all the bindings and what are they called? The wrappings, whatever. Now I'm pretty much finished with the inside. We're going to use Dawnstone by Games Workshop. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to put this on quite patchy, and I'm going to do that deliberately because this video is really all about mucking about with textures as well as painting the black coach. Just an opportunity with this model to experiment. So I'm putting that on, but I'm also letting it dry patchy. I'm not giving it a full coat. I'm also dabbing little bits off with the paintbrush. Now we're going to add a little bit of Administerium Grey to the Dawnstone, and we're going to start bringing up the tops of the model. So we're going to start working from the bottom to the top with these colours, but again I am leaving this quite patchy. As you can see, it's really watered down, so when it dries it won't leave any hard lines, but it'll definitely leave a colour transition to give sort of a rough grainy stone. That's the sort of idea I wanted to go with. And of course after that we're going to want to tone all that together using a watered down null oil. You can see why I did the coffin and then worked my way outwards, as yeah, it's very easy to spill that onto the actual outer coffin or the sarcophagus. So you don't really want to work all that woodwork and then go in and possibly muck it up this way. Alright, this is a really weird combination. So we did arbuckle brown before, but now we've got arbuckle brown, brown leather, Iroko and Reclam flesh shade all mixed up. This is to give a what would normally be a Reclam flesh shade, but now it's got all the base colours that we've previously used in. It's sort of a weird tone, and the Iroko gives it sort of a yellow tone where the sarcophagus or the wood effects have been chipped. And we're basically edge highlighting a lot of the bits we did in arbuckle brown, and as you can see, that gives a really nice effect there, and it really starts to make the woodwork look very weathered. Dawnstone and Administerium Grey again, and this time we're going to start painting the tops of the patterns on the coffin. Glazing those up as well. We're not just going to put a solid blob on there, we're just going to glaze those up. Now I'm going to do what I should have done in the first place, because the woodwork's a little bit bright still, so I'm going to use decay black and black leather to start working the underneath grooves. All I've done with the woodwork is just follow the grain on it, and this is going in between most of the grain, but because we had a very pale colour to begin with, it does look more weathered and like there's still some shine on the outside. Maybe the thing was coated in some varnish or something along those lines, and we've slowly chipped away and it's become undead and there's not much left of it. But I was quite happy with the woodwork, although to do it this way takes about 2-3 days of solid painting, and there's a lot of woodwork on it to work on as well, so it's very time consuming. Next up, decay metal. Pretty much straight from the pot there, watered down ever so slightly, and we're only going to use that decay metal for those decorative underneath parts, I believe. Now this is a colour I enjoyed doing quite a bit. For the wheels we're going to use wall block bronze, which is no surprise. It matches the colour for the undead things that we do. It's sort of in the right palette for that, naturally, but it's not going to be wall block bronze when we're finished with it. We're also not going to paint the inside details of this wheel either, that's going to be a different colour. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add Model Air Metallic Gunmetal plus Model Air Metallic Rust together. This is going to give sort of a warp block bronze look, because the rust is sort of a warp block bronze, but it's still going to have a bit of a silver tone to it. It's got more silver in it than it has the rust, but over the warp block bronze it does show it through quite a bit. Now we're going to use warp block bronze plus Moonstone Alchemy by scale 75, and Andy seems to really like this colour. I thought it came out really well, because Moonstone Alchemy is quite a pale yellow colour, and what we've got now is a metallic with a slight yellow tone to it, but it's still quite a dark colour rather than it being bright, so the warp block really did its job there, and we're going to paint all the insides of the wheel with that. Now we're going to use Model Air Metallic Rust and Model Air Metallic Steel, and we're going to use that to start highlighting the outer parts of the wheel and those decorative parts, but not the inside that we've just done in the Moonstone Alchemy, because we want to keep that a different tone to everything else. Next up is a mix of Null Oil and Athonian Camo Shade, and it's watered down, but be very sparing with your Athonian Camo Shade, and we're going to apply that over all of these metallics. The Null Oil there is going to help tone down the Moonstone Alchemy look, but keep the yellow there, while the Athonian Camo Shade is actually going to emphasize the fact that there's a bit of yellow there as well. It's also going to tone everything a little bit more ghost-like. And that's pretty much it for those metallics. I just followed that pattern around most of the model. So that's that part of the metallics pretty much finished. We may come back later on, I'm not 100% sure. But we're going to move on to the curtains now. And they're just done in a corn red. The reason I didn't follow the traditional artwork is because Matt commissioned this video, wanted this painting as a tutorial, and also wanted the model doing, which we're happy to do. and he wanted the colours just that little bit brighter. Next, I'm going to use Scale 75's Blood Red, which is slowly becoming one of my favourites to highlight red with. Plus the fact the Scale 75s have got such small pigment in it, they're really fun to glaze. Time consuming, but you will get a really good result. So I'm going to highlight all those edges and just leave the corn red in the recesses. And of course, anyone who knows me and watches my videos often will probably guess I've just added raccoon flesh into the blood red now. And I will say on this video, I generally will use raccoon flesh to brighten up any colour. As it brightens it up like a white, but it's not too over the top. Now I'm going to use Carriage Crimson mixed with null oil. I may have put a little bit too much null oil in here and darkened those curtains down a bit too much in this step, so I will have to re-highlight them up. Obviously you don't want that pooling anywhere, so you got to clean up that mess and make sure you don't drip it. Also, something to note is it was easier to do the inside for those metallic parts as well before doing the reds. You don't want to do it the other way around. As you can see, I followed that metallic all the way around most of the other parts, getting a nice effect. So next I'm going to use Green Grey by Model Colour. I'm going to start putting in the details in the lamps. You don't have to be amazingly careful with this, and the colour actually goes on quite thick, which is fine. In these small areas it's not going to matter. You want a good solid covering of that. And then we're going to use Goblin Flesh by Scale 75, and as you can see I'm just adding that on top quite messily, because when we put the other colours on later on they're going to add the darkness around the frame of the lamp and give that sort of glowing effect. But all I'm really doing is just covering the previous colour with Goblin Flesh watered down, and as you can see it becomes quite vibrant. Next we're going to use Model Air Medium Yellow and add that to the Green Grey. And this is going to give us a very vibrant yellow, but the paint consistency is quite strong. It will bond on there quite well, and we just dot in the middle, and it does give a really nice glowing effect to the lamp. Then what we're going to do is use Warpstone Glow by Model Colour, Warpstone Glow by Games Workshop, and start glazing that towards the edges where the lamps are. And you can also use this now as a wash over those lamps. That will then tone it all together and put a more dark green in the recesses of the lamps. I'm also working on the chair there as well, where the lamps will glow. And I'll work on the back of the carriage as well. So I'm going back to the Recklin Flesh shade plus the Blood Red, and the reason for that is, well, it ended up a bit darker than I would have liked, but the recesses are looking fine. They're a nice depth now, so I'm just going to bring out more of the pronounced areas on the curtains. Anything that's flapping in the wind and is just furthest away from the model would definitely need to be done. And with these bits that hang down here, you want to do the very bottoms of them, because the top's covered by the overhang of the carriage, so there'll be less light there. Now I'm going to use Administerium Grey on its own and start adding in a bit of edge work to the coffin. Again, just take your time with this, make sure your paint's nice and thin, and just pick out the very edges there just to add some more shape to it, because I obviously don't want it looking flat. And for the metallics on the inside, which I finally got around to doing, it's just an Agrax Earthshade wash. You should water this down and do it in several steps, and be very careful not to hit some of the previous work that you've done, because it does take some time, especially those leather straps. Now we're going to go back to the skull on the underneath of the carriage, as all the other metallic work is done, and we wanted this to stand out a little bit more. We're going to add Model Air Metallic Gold to the Scale 75's K Metal. We want to start building up those raised sections, and that includes the underbit there that is held together by those little claws. starting the top quarter there, and we're not actually highlighting the outer bits, we're just going to highlight the whole thing. As it's got raised notches in it, we're just going to highlight the whole thing because we're going to put a pin wash on this as well, so that's going to put the depth back in. After that, we're going to add a little bit more Model Air metallic gold. I do find myself doing that a lot more recently, just adding more and more of a different colour in it to help with the transition rather than just glazing one particular colour over it. So you'll probably see me doing that a lot more. It does help to have a wet palette while doing things like that. Next is just give it a thin wash of Reclam Flesh shade just to warm it up a little bit. I'm still going for that weathered look. I don't know whether warming it up at the time was a good idea, but as it's getting a pin wash, it will sort out those gaps that are now a little bit more orangey than I would have liked. Next, we're just using straight Model Air metallic gold, and we're going to use that mainly on the skull at this point. As you can see, the Reclam Flesh shade did dry quite well on that underneath, and it does look highlighted and quite weathered at the same time, so that's not too bad. And I think at this point I'm just edge highlighting the very tops of those. Be careful not to get that on your woodwork as well, as it's very easy to spread metallics where you don't want them. And just to finish that off, we're going to use Model Air metallic steel plus gold. So steel's just going to brighten that up, take it away from the gold look, and we're just going to use that to edge highlight the skull, bring out the brow, the nose, and under the eye sockets. As you can see, I'm also highlighting those notches, so you can just use it as an edge highlight if you would like to, but you can glaze it on as well. It really depends on your style of painting and what it is you like to do. So at last we're on to the horses, which is a lot of fun to paint, it really is. If I don't sound that enthusiastic, it's because the computer keeps mucking up on me and I keep having to skip back and re-record this bit. But what we've done here is we started with the Vallejo Black Primer, and we're using Wolf Grey by Game Air, which I don't know why, for some reason as a light paint it just gives really good coverage over black, so I'm spraying the underneath of the horses. So they go from light underneath, as you want the light areas in the smoke and the spectral sort of effects. You can achieve this with rattle cans as well if you want to and you don't have an airbrush. Next I'm going to use Hellhound Flesh by Scale 75, which I am applying with an airbrush, but you can easily, with a paintbrush yourself, you could just glaze that on, or you could just use it as multiple washes just to tone those wolf greys to a more greenish ghostly hue. Next we're going to use Hulborough Blue and Ryland Grey by Scale 75 to give more of a dark blue tone to the top section. If you don't have those, you can use Incubi Darkness and just apply that with a brush over the top areas and then glaze it down into the Hellhound Flesh. Well, glaze it up from the Hellhound Flesh as a wash, and you'll get a very similar effect. Like we say in all our videos, what I do with the airbrush can easily be replicated just by using a paintbrush. I'm literally doing this to save time, as the video did take about 2 to 3 weeks just to get this done. Next, as we've thinned out all those colours there, I'm going to start bringing the Hellhound Flesh in again. And I'm going to start working that more towards the bottom sections, as I want more transition at the top, a bit of a brighter blue as well, so I'm going to leave space for that. As you can see, that's really starting to build up nicely there. Next is Sotec Green by Games Workshop, which is honestly more of a blue colour. Again, you can do this with a paintbrush. You do this colour in the middle, and then you glaze from the Incubi Darkness to the Sotec Green, and then from the Hellhound Flesh to the Sotec Green. And you can achieve these effects the same way, guys. It's just easier for me to do it with an airbrush, and definitely saves me a lot of time. Next up, we're going to add a bit more of that ghostly effect in there using Model Air Duck Egg plus Hellhound Flesh by Scale 75. Now the Duck Egg is more of a yellow version of the Hellhound Flesh. looks quite similar and works as a natural highlight. I basically did a bit of both to make sure I didn't overshoot the mark and make it too bright. So I've still got some of that base undertone there, and then I'm going to lighten that up a little bit by adding the duck egg to it. Next I'm going to use Colia Green Shade and Dragonoff Nightshade, really watered down, and I'm just going to start spraying that into recesses where I want a bit more shadow. It's really starting to bring that spectral ghostly effect out at the lower section. Now it is hard for the camera to pick this up being such light colours, so I do hope when I export this video that it comes out well enough for you guys. Next we're going to go back to our duck egg mix again, basically because we've toned down some of the other sections and I'm using an airbrush. If you were using a paintbrush you'd have more control of where that goes, because in this instance the airbrush is giving out a cone and I'm covering stuff that I might not necessarily need to. But with the airbrush I can just go back over again and bring out the raised areas. Then it's going to be duck egg straight on its own. Again, being very careful to only get this in certain areas. You don't want to just spray the whole bottom duck egg. As you can see, we're getting a lot of nice transitions between the horse legs and the smoke now, and trying to make that look natural, if that would work in this scenario, them being undead ghost horses. And to brighten that up even further, we've mixed in a little bit of ivory by Model Colour into the duck egg. So at this point it's almost an off-white with a slight hint of a sort of spectrally green. And all those colours in combination, you can just muck about with the paintbrush and you can still get the same sort of effects. I almost forgot to do the mane on most of these as well, but I then add that in later on. Next we're going to start working on the bone for these. And we're going to put down a nice strong base of Mournfang Brown, as it's a good base colour and it's going to cover up all that blue. We're going to just do the ribs and the skull helmet, skull faces. Next up we've got Zandri Dust by Games Workshop, which is a really good highlight for the Mournfang Brown. I was a bit concerned that the Mournfang Brown would make the bone a bit too warm by the time I'd finished, but apparently it didn't, so I was quite glad about that. Next we're just going to go to Games Workshop's natural highlight for that, which is a Shabti bone. Could have used some other colours. I was concerned that the skulls would be too warm, and in hindsight later on I wish I would have added some blue washes to the very tops of the skulls where they join the rest of the model. That would have been pretty cool. It could have been done, but this video ended up being really long and the paint job ended up taking a really long time. Now I've gone over the straps just to bring the details out on those with Vallejo's black primer as per usual. Now I'm going to use Games Workshop's Dryad bark as the base for them. Again, I'm going to muck about with the leather a little bit, but nowhere near as much as I did the other straps, as I'm trying to get this thing finished. But in hindsight, I should have spent more time on the straps for the ghosts than I did on the guy in the coffin. Next, I'm going to use Gorthor Brown as a highlight for the Dryad bark. We're going to start working from the midsection and top section there, just blending it in. Doesn't have to be anything too fancy there, just glaze that in so it's pretty smooth and you can see our light source hitting the top of it. Next we're going to use Gorthor Brown and Rakar Flesh. As always, I'm just adding that Rakar Flesh in there so I can make a highlight colour that matches perfectly and it just looks like the light source is being diluted. I'm also using that to sort of edge highlight those as well, and they do start to really stand out. Now that we've brought out the edges on the harness, we're going to use Canterbrick Scale 75 and Rakar Flesh, as always, just to make a nice bright blue there to start following some of the edges on the horses. I'm going to start bringing those colours out a bit as well, just so they're not a solid blue. I also then noticed, looking at the artwork on the cover, the whites that I've done are a little bit too high up. They should have really been a bit further down to blend stuff in. So what I've done here, I've got Baltan Green and Dragonoff Nightshade. One of them slightly more green, one of them slightly more blue. I've got two of them, and some people have seen me do this before. I will mix these on the actual model itself. So I will start with the bluest one at the top section, and then add a little bit of the greener one on there, and I'll brush it on and brush it off all the way down the model, so we get a seamless colour transition between the two, and it's just going to add some extra colour into those bits that looked a little bit pastel-y, and it'll also help the underneath of the carriage there stand out. And I eventually stuck it to the base to give me something to hold on to, hoping I would not chip the paint as much. Then we're going to use Victorian brass by scale of 75 for all the rivets in the carriage, and once it's all put together here, it does start to look alright. There's still a few more colours and a few more things to touch up, as we haven't even touched the driver yet, or the other ghosts, but mainly the other ghosts have been done in the same fashion. The underneath of the smoke ghost effects have been done. Now I'm going to use Soatec Green and Rakarth Flesh again, just to bring up the highlights on the horses, on the blue pots a little bit more, as I just felt they needed it, and wanted to really make them stand out, as they are. They are really cool. They're a bit difficult to paint and hold on to, but yeah, whoever sculpted them did a very nice job. And for a change, I'm going to actually add ivory into that mix of Soatec Green and Rakarth Flesh, just to really bring up a very fine highlight. Just a much brighter area, and you could keep going with that, to be honest, until you almost hit the previous colours. But I didn't deem it necessary. And once you've got those edges on there, you can see it really starts to stand out. Next up, we've got Rakarth Flesh on its own as a highlight for the bone features. Like I was saying before, it would have been nice if I realised or took the time to blend those bone bits into the blue bits a bit. I would have liked to have spent a lot longer on this model. Now we're on to the driver. And after the driver, I do believe we finished. So these are the last touches, guys. We're on the last stretch. This is Dryad Bark by Games Workshop for the cloak. As you can see, the ghostly effects on him were done. Just skip out all the blues almost that were done in the horses, and we're just focusing on the colours for the bottom half. So he really didn't take long to do, especially with the airbrush. Now we're going to use Scale 75's Walnut, and that's what we're going to use for the staff, as the walnut is clearly from the wood range, and gives a nice colour contrast compared to everything else. I do recommend getting some of the Scale 75 sets in your collection. Can't go wrong with the Scale 75. Since we started getting them, we've tended to use those a lot more than any other paint. Now we're going to use Red Leather by Scale 75 to start going over the cloak a bit more. Excuse me. Using the red leather to go over that cloak a bit more, and we're going to do a lot of layers there, as it's a Scale 75, and bring that up so it's a nice reddish brown. And while that's drying, I'm going to use a Mournfang Brown as a base coat for his scythe, which is a technique I do like to use when doing Nurgle stuff. If you start with a rusty colour and then add your metallics, you can muck about and let some of that bleed through, and it just tones your metal a little bit warmer and a little bit more rusty. Next, we're going to mix Tusker Fur with the red leather. Tusker Fur's Games Workshop and red leather Scale 75. And as always, we're going to glaze up the cloak, just the raised areas. I didn't want to fasten this guy to the carriage because it would be a huge pain to paint him with him being on there. Also, I probably, when I do pack them to Matthew, I won't attach these particular parts because they'll probably get damaged in transport. Once we've highlighted that up, we're going to add a watered down null oil just to blend those two colours together a bit more. Just make sure there's no brush strokes or any of that on there. Although I have been having a lot of problem recently with the null oil by Games Workshop not setting the way it used to. I don't know why that is. Next we're going to use Gunmetal by Model Air Metallic to go over most of the blade. Now you don't have to put this on 100% smooth, not for the effect that we're going for. Well, not smooth in the way of like it's lumpy paint. You don't have to put it on really thick, you can let some of that colour bleed through. And sometimes, like here, you can just leave a bit of the Mournfang showing through. Next we're using Model Air Metallic Steel, and what I'm going to do is start with an edge highlight. I'm going to clean my brush off, and then I'm going to feather that edge highlight down into the rest of the model and back and forth. So you get a nice transition on the model between the gunmetal and the steel. And as there is Mournfang underneath it, to really bring out the Mournfang that's already underneath there that may show through ever so slightly, we're going to add a Mournfang wash. That's just really going to accentuate those two colours and make it look like it's actually the rust is going all the way through the scythe. Next up, we're just going to re-highlight that cloak again, but higher up than before, and we're going to use Tusker Fur and Red Leather again, this time with a little bit more Tusker Fur, as I do like a muted colour for this. You could also use this for the curtains or the blinds on the coach if you wanted to, but as I said, I was requested to do those a bit brighter, so in comparison I also changed a lot of the other colours for the model as well, just to make things fit. Now we're going to use a null oil on the scythe. Eventually I end up doing the helmet for this ghost in the same technique as well, just to make it match and also just to save time. Don't let the null oil pool inside the holes in the scythe, you will lose a bunch of your details there. And there's a scroll hanging off the side of it, so we've used a lot of Zandri dusts and everything else. I needed some other kind of tone, so I started with an XV88 for this. Just to give it a more yellowish tone. We've got a lot of red tones on here. We've got like reds, and we've got some cold colours as well. So we've not used anything in the way of yellows and much in the way of greens, so it should be complementary to the two. After that, we're going to apply Zandri dust. This is a very messy glaze, but it's applied in a way that it does cover the XV88. But it leaves a colour tone, so it's basically a filter, but some of the highlighted areas, they've got some Zandri dust on, a little bit stronger. For the whip, I basically used Blue Grey by Model Air, then I went over that again with Blue Grey and Rakoff Flesh, just to start bringing up that edge highlight. And for the staff, I was going to spend some time doing more wood effects, but I was definitely running out of time, so I added Rakoff Flesh to the walnut. Did some light highlights on the notches and raised areas, but also drew in some lines and grooves to add a little bit of a wood texture to the spear to the scythe. Next, I'm using Ishabti Bone as a very quick highlight to the scroll hanging off the scythe, which is very similar to what we did to the skulls, but the XV88 does allow it to have a tone of its own. Next up, we're using the Agrat Thurshade, and we're going to apply that to the blade just to add a little bit more of that dark rusted colour. We're also going to apply that to the scroll at the same time as well. And yeah, it makes that almost seamless there. It will fill in those gaps nicely. And just for the last few metallic parts, so this is the goblet, and we also do this on the head of the sword as well. We're using Model Air Metallic Gunmetal as a base. And this was quite a cheap and easy way of making a weathered gold. It came out quite well. So once we've done with the Model Air Metallic Gold, we're going to put in Amber Alchemy by Scale 75. And we're going to keep that pretty watered down. It's going to take a couple of layers. You want it to blend with the gunmetal, so it's not 100% clean, especially in this instance because we want it weathered, so we want a little bit of those silver bits coming through. And after the Amber Alchemy is on, we apply Model Air Metallic Steel to just the tips of everything and the edge highlights. If you want to, you can put those edge highlights on, add a tiny bit of water to your brush and just feather it in a little bit more. Then after that, all we do, and I'll show you how we got this weathered effect, we just add Army Painter Strong Tone over the whole lot. As you can see, it wasn't very difficult at all. That Model Air Metallic Steel went just straight over that goblet there. You can see the left hand side that I haven't done yet. Just went straight over the middle with a bit of that, and then washed the whole thing with Army Painter Strong Tone. And there we have it. That was a long video. It has been a lot of effort to make this one, and as you can tell by our Lazy Susan picture, we couldn't fit the whole image on as we usually would. We had to take the background off and use a black t-shirt, as the model's just so big it wouldn't even fit on the Lazy Susan and the photography area properly. But that was a lot of work, guys, so I do hope you enjoyed that one. I hope Matthew was happy with his model. I did have fun for the most part painting this, although editing the audio has been a massive strain. Let me know what you guys think. I was quite happy with the horses. I would have made some improvements, maybe darken down my carriage a little bit more. And obviously I'm not going to pack it to Matthew like this. I will take those ghosts off so they can be packed up safely and easier without snapping off. Anyway, that's it. We finally made it to the end of the video, guys. So we have some thank yous to give out to our patrons. We have thank yous to the Alt Boys, Matt, Ludwig Hofbauer, Warren, D-Wack, Kit Lindquist, Acmus of Dawn, Mark and Dave. You guys are awesome. Your support helps a lot with this channel, helps us get more models, more equipment, and in this case Matt paid to get this model just painted for a tutorial, which is awesome. If you want to join them on Patreon to get access to stuff like that, as well as other cool monthly things, we have to give a big thanks to the Outpost, who are our affiliate. If you follow the link down in the description, you can get 15-20% off all hobby merchandise, including Games Workshop models, paintbrushes, and all the other paints that we're talking about as well. So if you want a black coach with 15% off, follow the link in the description. And as always, guys, don't forget to hit like, share with your friends, because that's really important and it helps the channel grow. Leave a comment if you've got any questions, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys.